Welcome to the Zandbergen Report, where wealth strategies and investment wisdom collide, featuring your distinguished host and certified financial planner, Bart Zandbergen.
Welcome to the Zandbergen Report, showcase for wealth strategies and investment wisdom for our evolving world. We have in studio today, as usual, Paul, our fearless producer.
Yes. Biting my fingernails as we cut this one close today.
Close. And, of course, my trusty partner, Letitia Burbaum.
I keep you on your toes.
All right, let's get right into this. So today, somewhat following our theme of what keeps you up at night, we're gonna do a slight shift on that, and we are going to talk about the 7 money mistakes millionaires like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates never ever make, but the average people do all the time. So there you have it.
I love it. Well, this is great because sometimes we talk about our clients and how they have an abundance of wealth, and there's a transaction that takes place over time. Get if you want to peel the onion, let's say, and let's go back to the very basics, and let's talk about some of the strategies to get to where you are today, to get you to the goals you want to be in life. And sometimes we talk about money growth or investing, but really what we're talking about today are what are some of the pitfalls or mistakes so we can help you avoid. And we're going to talk about all 7. So if we missed one, and because we run out of time, I want to make sure you guys log on to our podcast and go ahead and check that out. And on our social media, we also post details and answers under each one in live links, so we can give you guys some great tools and tips. But I don't want to just take it over with too much information, Bart. I want to start with tip number 1 is they don't waste money on fees.
Correct. And you've already taken over the show, so well done.
Can I take over question 1?
Okay, so let's talk about that. They don't waste money on fees. And with this, I think we're talking about all sorts of fees, from the small ones that add up to the larger ones.
Correct.
And the smaller ones as insignificant as they may sound, but there's like banking fees and interest fees and credit card fees. But the bigger fees are making sure, like I think our fees, for example. You want to work with an advisor that charges, reasonable fees and doesn't have fees stacked on top of fees, but is very transparent.
Correct.
And just charges a reasonable amount of fees.
So questions that you can ask them is, how do you charge fees and what does that look like? And then they can put together a portfolio for you and show the fees. But even breaking that down, being mindful, like what you just said, Bart, of the fees, and something very, very simple people say all the time, what they do at the very beginning is they take action. So, for example, they pay their bills on time. And kind of, at least if you feel like you're not great at money management, a lot of times people take advantage of features. They use auto pay. So maybe they know that they're going to get busy, and maybe they're a family and they have young children and like, man, I don't know how I'm going to handle all this. When do I have time to take care of it? A lot of times people put things on auto pay and then it automatically is taken care of. So then on a monthly basis, you're able to track your expenses and you're avoiding fees and late penalties and miscellaneous fees just because you're not taking care of it. So you can, even on your credit cards, you can set it up saying, I want to pay the minimum fee, and then you can pay the additional amount, whatever you choose at that time. But at least you never get a late fee, which is great.
Which I know would make you lose your mind.
I know. I hate fees.
You lose your mind.
I don't like fees, and I don't want our clients to have fees, and I talk about that all the time.
So I also want to make a comment real quickly that some of these may seem like super simple and maybe even insignificant, but if Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, if it's important to them, I think it's important for us and important for our listeners.
Well, let's talk about it, just adding another element to it. I have experienced so many CEOs and owners of companies, and they're running these large companies or even family companies that are very successful. And what they're good at might not necessarily be the cash flow or the cash management. And maybe they've outsourced that to a third party to pay their bills on their behalf. But being aware of what's going on and having your finger on the throttle and understanding where the cash flow is and just seeing that and checking in is so critical. So it depends on what stage you're at. It's really still important to understand the cash flow. And also, we've said this before in another show, what's important and what's needed and required and what's extra and nice to have. So sometimes being aware of that.
Sure. Let's go on to point number 2.
Okay.
they don't ignore their credit score. And you would think someone like the really, really wealthy, they wouldn't even have to pay attention to that. But it is important. And tell us why, Letitia.
Okay, so if we're going to use point number 2, don't ignore your credit score, going back to point number 1. So let's just pretend that you just got busy and you missed a mortgage payment. And then you got a late payment and you're like, fine, whatever, I just paid it the next month. Well, what that ends up doing is it could potentially lower your credit score. And your credit score is like, for adults, it's like your report card that sticks with you for life. And over time it evolves and changes. But if you make one little mistake, that thing can stick there and be on your blemish on your report card for 7 years. So, and then eventually just falls off, but it lowers your score. So scores might range anywhere from, let's say, 620 to 850, 890, something depending on the scoring agency. But these credit scores end up determining how much money you're going to pay on interest. And so, for example, if you're going to buy a home, they say APR all the time, annual percentage rate. And so if you have a low score, say you made a couple mistakes, had a couple late payments, you have a low score. So say you're 640. Well, at 640, a loan company might not necessarily give you a loan. And if they do, they're going to charge you a higher rate. And how they do that is they increase your interest rate that they charge you, that APR, because they're looking at you as you could potentially be a credit risk to them. So me being very numbers driven, I created 2 different Bart's looking at me with his eyes wide open.
Really?
I always come with data and stats. This is how we work sometimes. But I'm going to give you 2 examples. So if you're going to buy a home, and just to keep the numbers very simple, this can be a $100,000 home, $1 million home, $10 million home, whatever that looks like. I'm just going to show you the numbers. So say someone who pays all of their bills on time, that has excellent scores, and say that their rating, say that someone has like a 760 or 750 credit score compared to someone that has, let's say, 650 credit score, they might get different interest rates. So I'm going to show you an example of 2 different examples. So I'm going to just pretend, for name's sake, I'm going to pretend that I'm the person that has the lower score. I'm younger, I may have made some mistakes, and then Bart is the person who pays everything on time and has stellar credit, and he has a higher score. So I have a lower score. I have the 640, and I go to the mortgage broker and I say, okay, what's the interest rate that I get? And then they end up giving me a score of 4.45. Say, okay, great. That's my score. That's my interest rate. Yeah. And based on my score, and then I want to buy a house for $100,000. So what that actually says to me is, at the end of the day, I want to buy my home, and I'm going to have interest rate, and I'm doing it over a 30-year period of time, and let's say I'm going to have PMI, and there's little extra things that go into it, and we can go into that online. I can break it down and show you an example. But on a monthly or a total interest paid over 30 years, just the interest alone on that $100,000 home, I've paid $81,317 in interest on that, based on my interest rate of 4.45. So because I made a couple mistakes, I got a higher interest rate. Now Bart here is great. He pays everything off right away. He's doing really good. He has a higher score. His interest rate came in at 3.84%. Again, these are hypothetical numbers. I used today's rates, but these are hypothetical numbers. At the end of the day, the total interest, all things being the same, he bought a home, cost $100,000 at 3.84%. The total interest he paid over 30 years was $68,483. So at the end of the day, that's a substantial amount of money savings.
And the interest rate difference is only like 0.6.
Small.
Yeah.
It's really
just
small.
Just over 0.5% difference.
But thousands of dollars over time by money management. So
and that was a $100,000 loan. Now take it, as times, if it was $1 million, add a couple zeros.
Yeah.
And
It's a huge difference. And to the big picture, something small, I know that doesn't make sense, but like going back to not wasting your money on fees and being late on things, it can be a compounding effect that can affect you over time. So there's that. That's an example.
Okay. Well, let's go to number 3. This one is a little painful for me. They don't spend impulsively. And as I'm reading some of our notes here, Bill Gates has a $10 watch.
Right. Bart, you're not wearing a $10 watch.
No. And Warren Buffett eats the same breakfast at McDonald's every day, which never costs more than $3.17.
I do love Warren Buffett, but that definitely has to clog his arteries.
Yeah. And actually, he has a home that just sold in near where we live, and so I've heard of people that have seen him and seen his frugal lifestyle. And then Mark Zuckerberg, this is super painful. Mark Zuckerberg drives a manual transmission Volkswagen. So I clearly have a few things to learn in this category.
Those are extremes, right? But I think the objective is, at the end of the day, they're talking about be careful with impulsive buying. So just because your neighbor has a brand new Lamborghini does not mean that you need a brand new Lamborghini, right? You have to.
Well, you're stealing from one of our from point number 7, keeping up with the Joneses.
No, number 3. It's right here in our example, the Lamborghini.
Yeah, but that's not because your neighbor has one. That's because this famous person has issues.
Right. Okay. So the bottom line is on that, I think, is really try to spend within your means. And rich people have the idea of rich people don't get rich by spending it all. So you can buy things lavishly every once in a while, and that's fine, and have goals and rewards for your goals, but don't just like, hey, this new car looks great, let's just go buy it. And no matter what, and then maybe it's outside of your budget and can't afford it, or you're going to be late on your payments, or it's unrealistic if you lost your job and you don't have savings to afford that long term. That's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to help you change that.
Great. Number 4, they don't fall for marketing ploys. So part of that is they're normally very good comparison shoppers.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And always kind of look at the big picture and weigh the benefits versus the cost.
So like a value system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's so easy to do these days. I mean, that you can just go online and compare. If it's a big ticket item, there's a lot of different websites you can go on to compare the cost, the quality, the brand, the design, and compare that way. You can do some additional shopping. For example, when we were buying our solar in our house, we didn't just go buy solar. We went and talked to 5 or 6 different vendors, and actually I'm not just necessarily going with the cheapest brand. The cheapest brand was a company that doesn't have a long track record, and the reality is if something happened to them, there's nothing to fall back on. So we ended up going with a good quality, dependable product, maybe paid a little bit more, but we felt there was value there on that investment. So we didn't just go for the first salesman that came in our house and talked to us about the solar. We were really trying to make a good decision for what our, needs were for electricity.
Yeah. And I think this next point I'm going to make is not exactly what's being referred here, but I think there's a connection. Yeah. And that's, and I think it falls under marketing ploys. I know that people who may go to a seminar of some sort, and I think 2 things. Anything that sounds too good to be true probably is. And second, there's no such thing as money for nothing. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
How many people have bought timeshares?
That, or they come up with this latest, greatest idea where you do nothing, but you turn your computer on and you sit in your pajamas all day, and you're going to, make hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. Yeah. Without doing any work. And maybe I'm just kind of old school, and I'm not saying not to work smart. Yeah. But there normally always has to be some sort of work. Nothing comes for nothing. Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I don't have anything against timeshares. I have one. It's just depends on what your needs are. So just making that clear. Okay, number 5, and this actually is probably the closest to.
So I'll read it, and then you can give us some examples, Bart.
Sure.
So don't try to beat the market. So give me 2 different examples on what that might be like.
So, I think at the end of the day, it's super important to have long-term strategies.
Yeah.
And I mean, we recently had some market volatility, and there are those that might have said, "Hey, this is too much. Let's get out. We'll get back in when the market is quote unquote good." And we know how that normally works out is by the time you get back in the market, it's already recovered and then some, and then it's too late. So the average normal emotional investor buys high and sells low.
Right.
So
good example is if you sold everything in the end of December after the market went down, and then you turned around and said, "Okay, Tish, when do I get back in? When do I get back in? When do I get back in?" And you wait, and you wait till now, you would have missed the
20%.
Yeah, you would have missed 20%.
Yeah,
it's huge.
Yeah. So and so that is related to the same subject with trying to beat the market. So one is timing, getting in, getting out, but the other is overperform or outperforming the market, and there are very few, if any, that can do that consistently. Right. I think.
And tell me a duration of time when you're saying long-term, consistent, outperforming the market.
So I think 10 years. Mm-hmm. I think that's a reasonable amount of time. And I think at the end, it's just all about having the correct diversification, realizing, and I think I mentioned this. It's one of my new terms, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Yeah. And so we're going to go through times like the last year, fourth quarter, where it's super uncomfortable. We know that over time, those things do happen. First of all, and then they happen pretty regularly. Yeah. And second of all, they get better. Right. And third, if you have the right diversification, you're not going to have the same impact negatively, and you will come out just fine.
So what do you do if you get a call from a client and says, "Hey, look, I want to follow the daily market momentum, and I want to buy and sell. What do you tell them?"
Well, I will try to share with them and educate them on how that doesn't work, and I may go through just obviously some examples. And having been in the business now for 28 years, I've seen lots of ups and downs. At the very end, and this has only happened maybe once, maybe twice in my entire career. If someone's really dead set on doing that, I'll have to say, I'm not the advisor for you. Yeah,
got it. Great advice. Mm-hmm. Anything else you want to add to this one, or you want to go to bullet number 6?
Let's go to bullet number 6.
Okay. So the next one is they don't just have one source of income.
So, and I know that could mean different things. I think it depends on where you are kind of in your life, your career, your net worth. Mm-hmm. But for our clients, that most of them have a significant net worth, it means from an investment standpoint, income can come from different types of investments. Okay. It can come from preferred stock, and that would be dividend income. Mm-hmm. It could come from bonds, which are also dividends or interest. It could come from real estate. Mm-hmm. It could come from MLPs, master limited partnerships. So those are like oil type investments that are generating income. So I think it's really important to not only diversify the assets, but to diversify the type of income that comes from the different type of assets.
That's perfect. So that's one. That's for example, our portfolio could potentially generate those different types of income streams for a client. So that's one way of an income bucket. Then, for example, you can have like your 9 to 5 or the business that you run. You can have income there as well. You can also, like, you have physical property, right? You can have multiple properties and have income streams there. So that's just some other examples of multiple income streams. Or
100%. So and I know you're even a bigger believer than I, but having real estate and multiple real estate properties, and that's a great income diversification. One thing that we have seen sometimes far too often is someone comes in that works for a big company, doesn't even have to be a big Fortune 500 company, but all of their income comes obviously from the company they work at. Yeah. Their 401k is full of their company stock. Right. Sometimes their spouse works for the same company or in the same industry. Mm-hmm. That's a little dangerous. Right. And we've seen the Enrons, we've seen those type of things where
they lose it all at once, and then they're now like, what happens? I mean, that happened to my family. lost a ton of money in Enron. So you don't know, but everyone's affected. So that's why like I am a big proponent of diversification, and your income stream is also important to diversify and have extra I even like passive income. Personally, I make sure that my husband and I, we sit down, we talk about what are our long-term goals, where do we want to be, and being able to get to our goals through different income streams to be able to meet our long-term lifetime goals.
100%. Okay, hey, we're at number 7. Last
Yay!
one. All right. And lastly, the super wealthy, they don't keep up with the Joneses. So tell us about that.
So 78% of Americans actually live paycheck to paycheck. And so, again, that might not necessarily be all of our clients, but you would be surprised at the end of the day how many people I have seen. It doesn't necessarily matter your net worth and your cash flow. If you are spending everything that you're making and you're not saving anything and you're trying to keep up with the Jones and buy the latest and greatest thing, and you're buying things you can't actually afford based on a lifestyle you want to live, then if something were to happen and then you lost your job or you got divorced, these things happen, or a company goes under and has to file bankruptcy and your financial situation changes, you don't have anything to live, you don't have any extra cash flow trying to keep up with the Joneses. It ends up affecting you at the end of the day.
I mean, this is an age-old cliche or saying, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think it's different, it's relatable, different in different areas across the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I think where we live, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
And I know, just kind of separately yet related, trying to teach our kids to not fall into that same category.
Yes.
I mean, my 3-year-old walks around with a toy iPhone, and she's bananas about it.
Yeah.
So...
My daughter, too. They walk around and they have a phone to their ear like, wait, you don't need to have... That's crazy, right? Yeah. It's expensive.
Yeah.
And...
So, all right. Anything else you want to say before we kind of close up this subject?
Well, I think that sometimes this topic might be boring and might not be that exciting to people, but at the end of the day is how you manage your money happens in a lot of different ways. It's not just us, the money managers, that manage it. It's all the different elements to get you there. So sometimes people ask, like, even if they have a dream and they want to get to the end goal and say, okay, I want to have X amount of dollars, I want to have this type of lifestyle. Well, and they don't know how to get there. Maybe they didn't learn that from their parents, or they didn't learn that in school, and they want to figure out what that looks like. There's so many amazing resources out there, but these are some fundamental tips of basically saving money, living within your means, paying yourself first. We didn't even talk about that. Yeah. But paying yourself first and spending, what you have, and being able to allow yourself to continue to let your financial wealth grow, then, slowly and surely you'll get to where you want to be. But if you overspend, or you're absorbed with bank fees, or you make too many mistakes and you have a high credit or low credit score that affects your interest rate, all these things can compound, and it's just a domino effect. So some great tools to kind of either help you make a change. It's not too late to make a change today and get you to the direction you want to be. Or maybe you're incredibly wealthy and you want to teach your children that you're going to be passing it on to, saying, hey, these are some great steps to be able to get you to make really good financial decisions in your life and good financial habits.
We tend to talk about very sophisticated and complicated things that affect the higher net worth, but it's interesting that all of these things are really the most basic, yet practiced by some of the most famous wealthy people in the world.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought it was important that we at least cover that and make sure we cover our basics.
Yeah.
All right. We're about ready to close up. You want to tell everybody how to reach us, how to get a hold of us, where to find us?
So funny. So we have a podcast. It's Zandbergen Report, Wealth Strategies and Investment Wisdom. You can go on a variety of places, or Podbeam. We're on Instagram. Bart, you want to give
iHeartRadio?
Do you want to give them the URL?
I would, if I could remember exactly what it is.
Okay, well, you can go to any of my Instagram handles are all the same, or LinkedIn or Facebook. It's either Letitia Letitia.Burbaum at Instagram or at Facebook, and that's LETITIA.BERBAUM. And more than anything, also, if you want to check us out on our website, it's OptiVestInc.com, and go ahead and check that out and find out a little bit more about us and great resources.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. We look forward to being back in the studio next week. Cheers.
Tune in next week for the latest edition of the Zandbergen Report, Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Catch up on our recent shows by visiting bartzandbergen.podbean.com. The Zandbergen Report is also available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Interested in being a featured guest on our show or have a question you'd like to hear us answer? Email podcast@bartzandbergen.com. Bart A. Zandbergen, CFP, and Letitia Burbaum, AIF, are registered investment advisors with OptiVest Inc. and registered representatives with Gramercy Securities Inc., member FINRA and SIPC. Investment advisory services are offered by OptiVest Inc. under SEC registration.